This is Dr. Mawata Kyrie Sen, also known as Dr. Kevin Washington, and we're here with a preeminent scholar, Dr. Charles E. Lewis Jr., political social worker, and the founder and director of the Congressional Research Institute for Social Work and Policy, a nonprofit organization that works to engage social workers in the U.S. Congress. He's also an adjunct, or has been adjunct professor at Columbia University. Also impressed with his HBCU connection with the MSW program, clinical counseling from Clark Atlanta University, and has a PhD in policy planning and policy analysis from Columbia University. Dr. Lewis, welcome to this segment of this moment to deal with profound conversations. Dr. Lewis.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. What is it you can tell us about who you are and the work that you're doing right now that we should know that I did not cover in that brief bio?
Well, I'm from Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, New York. That's where I grew up. My dad was
Bed-Stuy, do or die, I heard.
Bed-Stuy, do or die. My father was a pastor. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was 16, and kind of left me without my brother. Try to find my way, in life. My mom had died when I was 4 years old, so it was true. He had my dad remarried, so my stepmom was there for us, but a lot of things a lot of things occurred in my early years that kind of shaped who I am today. Back in the day, if we go back to the 60s, when I was in college, there were upheavals on campuses, kind of like what's happening in some areas today. And I dropped out of my studies at City College in New York, and because they were warring in the streets. I was an engineering major, so I was on the North Campus with predominantly white students, and the few black students who were at City College, there weren't many, were on the South Campus, and they would meet in the middle of the street, and I didn't know where I was. I knew, like the engineering students, that we couldn't afford to have the school shut down. But the brothers and sisters were saying, no, we can't keep going on the way we're going on. Justice needs to prevail. So I finally kind of checked out and said I would, try to get back when things, was a little more clear. Long story short, I guess I kept waiting for the right time. And eventually I went back at the age of 42. And and over the course of those years, I didn't get into any, major trouble. I didn't get arrested or incarcerated, but I dabble in some drugs and alcohol and all that good stuff. So I wound up going back to the church where my roots were, and there I was able to join this men's ministry at St. Paul Community Baptist Church in Brooklyn. And it was a thriving ministry. There's a book written about that called Upon This Rock, The Miracles of a Black Church. And so I went into therapy. We're talking about mental health now. I went into therapy for a number of years, and it helped me immensely. And so I said, I can do that. And I went back to school with the Clark Atlanta University and got a degree in clinical counseling, master's in clinical counseling, got my license. But then as I was preparing to go back and I realized that then some attention was needed at the higher level of policy. And so that's when I decided that I would be one, because I couldn't find many people of color in that arena. One person I did find was Ron Mincy, uh, and worked with him. Um, and then I got accepted at Columbia, got a PhD, and then headed to Washington because I thought this was the capital of the world, and I wanted to bring my voice and talents to DC. I wasn't planning to go into academia because at my age, I thought, I don't want to be a junior faculty person, because I was 50 years old by the time I got my PhD. And so I went, but I was, one of my friends convinced me to take a job at Howard University. So I taught at Howard University School of Social Work for 8 years. And that didn't work out. And so Congressman Ed Towns, who I had known from Brooklyn, offered me a job on the Hill. And that's how I got my first entree into Congress.
Dr. Lewis, your narrative speaks volumes, right? You talk about the issue of family, community, had some disruptions in the family, your mother's transition, your father's transition, but the foundation of the church, activism. You went to activism into City College, and the conversation of having your voice heard in that process. And then you wove a narrative of transitioning to certain activities of socialization, social cultural phenomena of substance usage and so forth. I mean, the narrative is powerful, and then how you navigated into this space of social work. And it seems like you were positioned for this conversation from your early challenges in life. And then from there, Howard University also shared that in common. I worked at Howard University as well, so I'm very familiar about the Hill. I'm familiar with the nuances of the Hill, and so this I was going to go one direction, but it's like you mentioned. I think it was Ron Menzies. When you mentioned that, it seems like you have a narrative to speak to Black men, males, about movement and activism before we even get to this idea of political social work. So you all wrote a book called Black Left Behind. Share something about that book because you brought in Dr. Mendes.
Yeah, back in the 90s, I don't know, if you recall, there was they were referring to African American males as an endangered species because so many of us had been, caught up in the criminal justice system, and so there was concern about uh, crime in certain in some of our neighborhoods, and so this church that I attended had reached out to African American males, and I was made the director of the men's ministry. So that's how, and so we had a fellowship that met on Tuesdays, and I brought as much information, knowledge. I mean, it was a very interesting experience because the pastor, Dr. Johnny Ray Youngblood, was he was very keen on Afrocentric thinking, and so he would bring in the scholars like Malala Karanga, uh, Dr. Naeem Akbar, and to talk to men, and we had quite a few hundred men who attended this church regularly. So that was my responsibility was to kind of oversee that program and fellowship. And so when I went back to school, I still focused on on the plight of African American men. In fact, my dissertation was on the negative impact of incarceration on employment and earnings of what we call fathers in fragile families, which are unwed young fathers who are trying to, have they were having children, and we weren't concerned about how the children would fare, but we were also concerned about their ability to take care of their children. And we found out that these young men really were trying to take care of their children, but they were facing some really headwinds like child support. I mean, a lot of these young brothers were racking up huge amounts of arrearage for not being, not having an adequate employment in order to pay, their child support, and this followed them, through life, and we were concerned about that, and so that's one reason Dr. Mency proposed this book, Black Males Left Behind, because he felt that there was a need to inform the public about, the policies that we were enacting, so focused on taking care of the children, but at the same time, it damaged the fathers and their ability to take care of the children. So it was an interesting dynamic, in terms of, okay, maybe some fathers weren't responsible, but we found out most fathers were responsible, at least to the ability to provide resources for their children. And oftentimes that those policies created a wedge between, the mother and because if you didn't pay your child support, I mean, eventually, it wound up, if you could go to jail if you didn't pay your child support, and that takes the father out of the equation altogether. But not only does it take him out of the equation, the child support doesn't stop when you're in jail, right? So you're accruing more and more debt, and so we realized that these kind of policies were absolutely, I don't know a better word than insane. You're trying to force the father to provide for the child, but at the same time, you're handicapping him to the point where he can't.
Right. So you talk about a system that perpetuates poverty, right? So nobody gets ahead of what you're saying about being left behind. And you mentioned, you dropped some names on us too. I want to make sure that we highlight those names. Of course, uh, great Reverend Dr. Johnny Ray Youngblood from Louisiana, New Orleans area. I'm from Louisiana as well, at that part of the country. I just came back from doing a presentation at the church that you mentioned, under the leadership of Browley, Reverend Browley.
Yes.
The so that coming together, and Dr. Naeem Akbar is one of my Jegna or mentors. While how I'm in the area along with Dr. Wade Nobles, and I was in California under the tutelage at some level of Dr. Karinga at State University. Came up there a time or two while I was there to speak with Dr. Nobles, and so I connected then and other times, of course. But the point is that these voices are speaking to a system. And I love what you said about system and policy, because policy can be very dangerous to a population. So we have a situation by which policy dictates or determines how one deals with child support. Now, not only can you get arrearages, from not paying, but if you want to pay ahead, that's also illegal. right? And I'm like, this is just some amazing system, and you can't leave the country, you travel abroad, so you're trapped. So
Right.
it provides an opportunity for one to be incarcerated and yet not incarcerated at the same time. So this idea of black male left behind, uh, the conversation is powerful and it continues. And the question becomes, what do we do about it? How do we begin to move forward? And it seems that you are addressing some of that when you talk about social workers in the context of policy. Now, so this idea of political social work, uh, share more about that. And I think it's going to link well with this conversation about policy and shifting policy for Black men and the Black family in general.
Right. So, for the most part, social work remains a direct service provider profession, where the vast majority of social workers are engaged in providing services to individuals, families, groups, and some work in communities. But there's a few of us who realize that we need to take it a step further, and that we need to be in these arenas, and we need to run for office because it matters who's in office. We need to introduce legislation that brings our ideas on the table. It's very difficult to pass legislation, but anybody can introduce a bill, and once you introduce a bill, you have something to talk about, because what that bill describes is your ideas for addressing some of the problems that we're having. So it's a means of allowing social workers to bring our ideas based on evidence that we generate through our research. So we've been doing that, and right now we've come up with something, and this is a little off the track the male perspective, but it's we've been focusing a lot lately on child welfare, because the well-being of children is the key to the future of the you know to the future of Black people, to the future of the country. Uh, um, how well we care for the children matters, and that means that. So I've been a proponent of addressing the mental health needs of young people, because I believe that would mitigate some of the risky behaviors that they might engage in, that ultimately leads to being engaged in the criminal justice system. But if you don't deal with those the traumas that they face, many live in high crime communities, where they face injury and death every day because of gangs and and police even. you know so they're facing a lot of negative uh, uh, influences. So what we were really concerned about, those young people, those kids who have a parent who is incarcerated, because that's a traumatic experience for any kid, to be separated from their parents. And there's quite a few kids. I believe that there's more than 10 million uh, young people who have a parent incarcerated, or have had a parent incarcerated at some point. And some of these people are now they're adults, but the trauma that they experience often doesn't get treated, and it can impact their lives. So one of the things we're trying to do is address those issues, and bring it to the forefront of people's attention. Um, we're calling it like family focused criminal justice reform.
The well, I was trying. I'm trying. I'm working diligently to stay right in the groove of your conversation. And what's happening is that every time you talk, there's something else that's comes alive. And I just want to just dial back just for a moment because you mentioned this idea of criminalization of a population. You mentioned the idea of incarceration and what that does, and mental health. But you also mentioned how that disrupts the family. We know that the basic, and you're a social worker, so you get it right. The basic unit of any civilization is the family. And so when one attacks the family, and of course that was a major assault on the Black community, was the Black family. When one attacks the Black family, and you talked about that also in the context of child support. So you talk about incarceration, you talk about child support. These are assaults on a family, which disrupts how people grow up. And now you're talking about the issue of trauma, the trauma that this occurs, the disruption in the flow. But I love what you're saying about the role and impact and influence of social workers on policy. What people often miss is that when a population of a disenfranchised group, when a member of a disenfranchised population becomes involved in some activity such as social work, by extension, they're also engaged in social justice because they're now beginning to address issues that have been put in place that have disrupted the order of things. And it seems like that's exactly what's happening when you talk about political social work. What are some of the policies, what more policies that you think that social workers should be involved in as we talk about repairing and restoring and addressing chaos from this idea of social work and child support, social work, and incarceration? Where do what's the where do what is the movement? Where should policy making social work be? What do they focus on? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, um, earlier this year, I met uh, a woman named Patina Love. I don't know if you've heard her name, Dr. Patina Love. Um, she she wrote a book called what is the name of her book? I can think of I'll think of it, but her focus the is educating young Black children and the miseducation uh, of young Black children, and I think that's the one area that we need to focus on, and that is it's called punished for dreaming. Punished for dreaming, and it's
Wow, deep.
yeah. She does a really incredible job of laying out the facts of how Black children have been miseducated and exploited, not just miseducated, but used to enrich different people through their educational. Um, they call it programs, but they were schemes, and so our ability to educate young, it's always been the number one civil rights issue, if you want to call it that, or the number one injustice is, we know that back in days of slavery, it was a crime to teach a slave to read or write. Okay, it seems like we haven't really escaped that the education that we are that our kids are getting it's often not the best and not and so different policies have to be in place. I mean, we have to provide the resources to educate the children, and because there's a um, there was a Supreme Court case, San Antonio versus Rodriguez, I believe that's the case, where the Supreme Court ruled that it was constitutional to fund education through property taxes. Now, once you fund education through property taxes, that automatically creates uh, an unbalanced educational system. So those who have the property and pay the taxes will have better education. Now, this, and that's why they ultimately created the Department of Education, so that the feds would be able to collect taxes and then help to fund those schools in neighborhoods where there really aren't any property taxes because everybody's renting. All right, so they're not really, they're not paying property taxes to undergird education. Things like that needs to be addressed. And, in terms of
you tipped something there. This last conversation about property taxes, funding education, and that conversation is linked as well because education comes from a Latin word educe. Educe means to bring out. Asians to process up. So it's the process of bringing out that which is already there. And you also kind of tied it into this idea of what we see now, even with the book banning. So as it was legal for enslaved Africans to read, it is now becoming also illegal for those who are descendants of those that have been enslaved to learn about themselves and to be empowered and to bring out the existing power that is within them. And so this is important. You're saying is that policies influence that. But when you talked about the funding part, I know from personal experience in Florida, not only the property taxes, but new houses, new communities with new homes, had more money going to the schools because there was a connection between building homes and the schools. So you can imagine then in the communities where people not only are renting, but they may establish themselves in older homes. So that there's also suffer because of that whole policy. So it hasn't stopped. It's the same horse, different color, or same dog, different spots. So we just have to recognize this process and be able to engage in it. And what you're telling us is that we need to understand policy. And if social workers are about the business, engaging in facilitating change in the lives of people, we can not only have ourselves at the grassroots level engage with the population, but also Dr. Lewis is telling us that we need to be at the policy level making level where we can begin to influence change that comes down to the community. Dr. Lewis has shared a great deal about the influence and impact of family, a family life, of a system that one can grow up in that can influence how they become. He mentioned activism of the 70s, 60s, and 70s, where people were protesting being marginalized and dehumanized. And he said that from his actions, he will engage in a process to facilitate change in lives of others, not only at the grassroots level, but at the policy level. Dr. Lewis, do you want to say anything else as we close out this first segment? And we're not done yet. This first segment of Profound Conversations.
Well, I'll just say that from there are many facets to this picture. I mean, I spoke about education and early childhood education, meeting the social emotional needs of kids in terms of, mental health. We could talk about the prescription drugs that are given to young people. That's a major part. We could talk about the child welfare system and the child protections quote unquote child protection services, and how that the role that that plays in disrupting families and actually breaking up families, because often the uh, the parent is, which is usually the mom, is reported to the child welfare system for neglect or maltreatment. And the neglect and maltreatment may not be, it's not due to her, not meeting her responsibility, but the fact that she can't afford stable housing. If you can't afford stable housing, then you're judged a unfit parent, and often those kids wind up in foster care or different situations. So those things need to, those things have to be addressed. But that's like the sort of the triage. After this happens, then you try to see how you can mitigate some of these situations. But of course, we know, you need to get ahead. You need to get upstream, right? and catch some of this stuff before it really impacts the kids.
That's solid. Thank you, Dr. Charles Lewis, for that conversation about what we need to do to be actively engaged in the process of change and not being passive about making things happen, but be engaged in the process of making it happen. So thank you so much for this, and we will resume in a moment.